Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining. This is kind of our, at least our infrastructure team's first remote event to try to do it this way. Typically, we would do these types of things in person, but as everybody knows, these are the types of ways we have to meet these days. Just as a housekeeping thing, this event's going to be recorded. We're broadcasting it right now on Facebook Live, and if anybody has any questions at any time about the things that we're covering at the beginning, feel free to jump in. We'll be happy to answer. My name is David Rice. I've been with Dean Dorton since 2015. I lead our infrastructure consulting team, which is one of our 5 areas of technology consulting. The other 4 being managed services as an outsourced IT. The third one is software consulting, which focuses a lot around financial software. We have IT audit and compliance. And then our newest area, that's not quite as new anymore, it's been around for a couple of years now, is our cybersecurity team. Today we're going to cover the Okta product for just a little bit, and then we'll jump into some fun. The goal of this was really just kind of get our name out, get this product's name out, and have a little bit of fun. So to present a little bit about Okta before we get to the good stuff is one of my engineers, Billy Zellers. Billy, go ahead and jump on in.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Just want to thank you for spending an hour of your afternoon with us today to learn a little bit about mixology and multi-factor authentication. Just to introduce myself, I'm Billy Zellers. I'm an engineer with Dean Dorton's IT Infrastructure Consulting Group. I've been with Dean Dorton for about 5 years now, since 2015, and I spent the majority of that time helping our customers simplify their networks and move to the cloud. So like David mentioned, our technology team covers a wide array of technologies and services. My primary interests have been solutions like SD-WAN, enterprise automation, network security, and user identity. I know everyone is probably more excited about the multi-factor authentication part than the mixology, so we'll start off with the multi-factor authentication. So let me tell you a little bit about the challenges we're finding with our customers today. First of all, the cloud. We're seeing companies take advantage of new technologies in the cloud. Users have gone from accessing servers throughout the day to performing their work in cloud apps. So we've got Office 365, WebEx, Salesforce, tons of cloud apps. And the challenge has become that these applications are all outside the firewall. So if an account is breached, there's tons of sensitive data all outside the firewall that is potentially at risk. From an IT perspective, it's complicated too. So if your IT department is having to manually provision and deprovision users from each of these applications, that's 10 times, maybe 20 times the applications that IT was dealing with before. So that can be a huge burden on the IT department. The second thing I'd like to talk about is legacy infrastructure. So most companies we find have a spattering of Active Directories, remote access challenges, and then security requirements are changing day to day. When companies are going to the cloud, they're running into challenges due to this legacy hardware and software paired with the new cloud technology. From a pure security perspective, many companies are going to zero trust because they can no longer assume that they trust a user when they're working remotely outside the firewall. And so the third theme we're seeing a lot of is what we call workforce identity. Employees are often finding themselves using multiple login pages, multiple portals, multiple apps every day. So often each of these applications has a different username, password policy, and it becomes complex. Even if we've got 10 different software as a service applications we're using, That's 10 different usernames, 10 different passwords that each employee is trying to remember. And in the middle of this whole mess, we've got the threat actor. So this is someone out there trying to steal passwords, company data, customer data, and it's just the reality that we're in today. These threats are all over the place, and we're constantly trying to keep up and evolve to keep up with these. So let's talk a little bit about that threat actor for a second. Since 2005, there have been more than 9,000 reported public breaches, 10 billion records exposed, and the vast majority of these breaches have been tied back to compromised credentials. So 10 billion records, 9,000 public breaches, 80% of these are stolen or lost user credentials. So right there, we've got one thing that we can focus on and maybe make this better. The traditional perimeter of the network was when you controlled everything in your own data center and you put a network around it all for security. Now that things have moved outside the perimeter into the cloud, this traditional perimeter security no longer works, and you can see from the numbers that managing user credentials properly can have a huge impact. That's where Okta comes in. So Okta is our preferred solution, not just for multi-factor authentication, but also for the management of user identity across the workforce. And if you've heard of Okta, you've likely heard that they're a leader in enterprise single sign-on. What you may not know is Okta is much more than a single sign-on technology. The Okta Identity Cloud offers a cloud-native, enterprise-class solution to manage identity for both customer-facing apps and the workforce. A critical piece of Okta's value is the Okta Integration Network. So Okta has a catalog of over 6,000 deep pre-built integrations for the most common cloud applications. We've got HR applications, infrastructure systems like AWS, security analytics applications, and we've got traditional applications more like email security. Proofpoint's an example of that. So there's almost 6,500 applications Okta has in this network, and you can find information about each one on Okta's website. Okta customers use the Okta Identity Cloud to solve workforce identity and customer identity challenges. So the first piece of the Okta Identity Cloud is single sign-on. This is where it all started. Okta Single Sign-On lets users go from numerous passwords, numerous usernames, to a single username and password. So right there, we've cut down what the users are needing to remember. IT loves this because it's a single spot to manage all of these applications across an extended workforce. So not only are we including employees, we're including contractors and partners as well. The second part of this is Okta's multi-factor authentication. So the multi-factor authentication adds an entire new layer of security above our username and password to make sure the person signing in is who they say they are. IT and security teams love this because the robust policy, VPN support, and contextual insights that we can provide with these multi-factors. Another part of the solution is Okta's lifecycle management. So lifecycle management helps IT teams automate account creation, onboarding, and offboarding of users, simplifying this joiner, mover, leaver lifecycle that we've got. So people joining the company, people changing positions in the company, and then people leaving the company. This gives users a great experience because gone are the days of sitting down at your desk on your first day and not having access to everything. You come in on day one, IT has been able to provision all the cloud applications you need, and you've got them in a single portal. So we're making things much easier and much less scary for that day one user that's joining the company. And then security teams love this as well because on the opposite side, if a user is terminated, they're terminated right away. We remove them from every cloud application. We shut down their access. And IT loves this because they're not having to do this manually. We're automating these processes that often would take IT departments hours or days to get completed. In the middle of this is Okta's Universal Directory. So Universal Directory is a place for IT and security to manage user groups, devices, and policies. And you can use Universal Directory as your master directory or integrate with Active Directory, LDAP, or HR systems. So Okta Universal Directory truly could be a solution to leave Active Directory behind. You can integrate HR systems to pull users directly from there and let IT spend less time creating users and more time solving problems. Okta has also evolved with services like Okta Access Gateway, API Access Management, and Advanced Server Access. These products allow on-premise applications, modern APIs, and server security in platforms like AWS and Azure to all be integrated behind Okta SSO and multi-factor. These products are what make Okta a powerful approach to modern identity access management. We often start these conversations with a focus on the company's workforce, so the employees, contractors, and partners, but we're seeing now more than ever that companies want to include this for customer-facing portals as well. So Okta has added features to allow you to not only secure your workforce, but your customers that are accessing applications that your company hosts. In other words, let Okta be the security layer for identity and access management. Okta is very serious about trust. The platform was designed, built, monitored, and updated with a focus on security and zero downtime. Businesses across the world are trusting Okta, and it's a great responsibility they really take seriously. And you can see this from the third-party attestations and certifications, all of which are available online. So Okta's truly found everywhere. The world's largest organizations are using Okta as their security layer. Secure identity is the key to protecting data. So any service that's designed around identity needs to be evaluated on availability, security, and scalability. So Okta is a completely cloud-native service, meaning that they are built in the cloud, they're built for the cloud, and there's one instance of Okta. So Okta is constantly updating this for you. Your IT department's not having to manage the software that is Okta. It's all built in the cloud and highly available for you. Okta also has world-class security controls. So there's multi-layer encryption built into the architecture. And Okta's developers themselves are forced to be under a zero trust control when they're accessing sensitive data or production code. Okta is also capable of handling a lot of growth. So Okta scales up and down automatically. Like I mentioned, it's completely cloud. So Okta teams are constantly managing this to make sure that they're only using 50% of their capacity. So if there are bursts, increased load, Okta will handle that with no problem. So Okta is one of the largest things for this. Okta is one of the largest platforms for this. You've got over 111 million authentications going throughout the day. They're seeing 1.2 billion authentication requests served and over 50 million unique users throughout the month. And I'm sorry, give me just a second here, everybody. I think there we go. Having technical difficulties here for just a moment. All right. So Okta's truly created the most secure and reliable identity product. So this is a product that every member of your team can count on, your customers, and your workforce. So let's talk a little bit more about where we're seeing organizations versus where we want to be and what's the path to get there. We're finding most organizations start the journey with Active Directory and little to no cloud integration. So users are managing those multiple usernames, multiple passwords, and many of those don't have MFA. And remember, 80% of breaches were due to unprotected user credentials. The first step is single sign-on and multi-factor application. So by tying in on-premise apps like Active Directory and cloud applications, we're able to create this unified single password experience across the entire enterprise. And let's talk a little bit more about multi-factor authentication in specific. So multi-factor authentication involves three parts. We want to have something you know, so a password, a security token. We want something you have, like a token or one-time password. And we want something you are, like a fingerprint or biometric solution. And a secure MFA solution should provide factors that fall into each of those categories, but allow organizations to choose which ones fit their specific scenarios. So start off with the easy factors. We've got factors like passwords, security questions, and we call these low assurance factors. So someone could easily steal your password through social engineering. Someone could determine answers to a security question. But since they're cheap, they don't require additional equipment, they can be appropriate for a low-risk situation when we're accessing data that isn't that sensitive. As we move up this assurance spectrum, we're starting to look at factors like SMS, voice, and software one-time passwords to give us an additional level of security. So we're adding the something you have case. The prevalence of users with mobile phones has driven this cost way down because we can piggyback off those mobile phones to provide this second step up beyond passwords. So these are good options. And then we move further down the spectrum. So now we're moving to inherently more secure factors. We're looking at tokens and one-time passwords, which are based on encryption, and biometrics, which are more phish-proof, or at least more expensive for an attacker to spoof. These factors may be more expensive in terms of cost or asks on the user, so it's important to balance between security and usability. A full factor and assurance range provides organizations with different options to choose different factors for different scenarios. So we want to ensure that organizations can comply with regulations, provide two ways to ensure identity is used without forcing the user through an overly complex process to do that. And I think that's really where Okta shines. So Okta offers Okta Verify. It's the push option for multi-factor. And all this requires is for users to install an application on their cell phone and get a push notification when they need MFA. So this push notification happens when a user's logging in and we want to verify that they are who they say they are. They get a pop-up on their cell phone, and all this says is, hey, someone's trying to access your company account. Here's where they're doing it from. Is this you? The user can say, this is me, and they can move on to log in, or they can say, this is not me, and trigger alerts to the IT department to look into the situation further. So now we've secured users with this appropriate multi-factor authentication method. Our users are more confident with their easy-to-use experience. They've got a single password for everything. What's next? And next comes what we call contextual access and risk-based access policies. So these are areas where we can utilize different factors based on different security requirements and different level of risks. And let me give you an example of that. So for example, let's say we've got a user accessing our office's in and out board from a corporate device that's located in our office. We know that because they're using a known device, they're in a known location, and they're not really accessing sensitive data. We might choose to allow this user to access this application with just a password. On the other end of the spectrum, if a user is accessing confidential business data, we might choose to require an Okta Verify push to their cell phone with a requirement to present something like biometric authentication, so Face ID on an iPhone, Touch ID on an iPhone. Risk-based policies take this a step further. What if we see a user access the in and out board from our corporate office here in Lexington, and then 5 minutes later we see the same user attempting to access confidential data from Russia on a new device we've never seen before? Okta can tell something's amiss, and it can immediately alert IT staff and block the access attempt. We can go one step further with risk-based policies, so we can take multiple pieces of this context, put them together, and make an educated decision based on the risk of each individual access attempt. Determining this increased risk is kind of a moving target. This is something that traditionally maybe we would need a security team to be watching and looking for something like this. Now we're going to use a more dynamic approach with Okta. So we've got these risk levels that are constantly shifting. We may think that a login from Russia is significantly more risky than a login from the United States. We're looking at that information and we're trying to determine, is the user acting appropriately? Are they trying to hide where they're coming from using proxies or a Tor network? Can we tell something based on who the user is or what device they're coming from? It wouldn't really make sense if we knew a device was assigned to our European office and a user assigned to our US office was accessing that device. We also want to look for suspicious locations where our company might not operate. So if we know we have no employees in Canada and we're seeing login requests from Canada, that's concerning. So Okta risk-based policies can take all of these factors and create a riskiness score. So we're going to use those components, we're going to create this score, and then we're going to decide, based on risk, we may require different types of multi-factor authentication. Maybe if it's a little risky, we would want that two-factor prompt. If it's a lot risky, maybe we want two-factor and biometric. So in the end, we're taking all this and we want to create the mix of perfect security and usability. We want to make sure the right people have the right level of access from the right places. So now that I'm on the subject of the perfect mix, let me turn this over to Sam from the Bardstown Brewing Company.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for letting me be a part of this event. Super excited to teach you guys how to make some really fun cocktails. And I want to thank Jenny Patterson, who reached out to me and considered Bardstown Bourbon Company for this event. So thank you very much to Jenny. So what we're going to do, what I'm going to show you is how to make two incredible bourbon cocktails. So the first one is going to be what I call the Bourbon Boulevardier, and this is a stirred cocktail. And then the second one is going to be a shaken cocktail that I call the Bitter Bourbon Sour. So we're going to start with the stirred cocktail. So I have my mixing glass right here. If you don't have a mixing glass, a pint glass or a tall glass of any kind will do just fine. So we're going to build the drink in the mixing glass and then serve the drink after we stir it to dilute it and chill it in a lowball glass, rocks glass. Hell, if you have a coffee mug, that'll work too. Whatever you got at home to enjoy your drink is just fine. So the three main ingredients to a Bourbon Boulevardier are, of course, bourbon, right? So for my cocktails, I'm going to be using Bardstown Bourbon Company's Fusion series. This is what we use in all of our cocktails here at our bar and our restaurant. And on the road when I'm traveling and making cocktails as well, because it has a very complex flavor profile that stands up to the other ingredients that you would mix with very well. Also, the proof is really ideal. Fusion is at 98.9 proof. So if you weren't able to get your hands on Fusion, then anything right at or around 100 proof is very ideal for both of these cocktails. So that is the bourbon I'm going to be using. The other two spirits for the Bourbon Boulevardier are going to be sweet vermouth. So kind of one of those spirits that maybe you don't think to grab a bunch, but is great in so many cocktails. You've probably heard of or had a Manhattan. So your vermouth is going to be in that cocktail, but it's also in this one as well. A lot of the bottles out there look very cheap and can be very cheap, but not in quality. I should say that they're inexpensive, but they're all typically great sweet vermouths. I haven't had too many that I don't care for. Most of them are pretty great. The one that I'm going to be using is a French style from a company called Dorton, but you can have Martini and Rossi. There are several sweet vermouths. Anything that you have sweet vermouth is going to work great for this. And then another very important ingredient to the Bourbon Boulevardier is Campari. So Campari is in a category of spirits called bitters, but not like your cocktail bitters that look like this. It's a red bitter, which is entirely different. It has a very medicinal taste. It is indeed bitter, but it's also sweetened and much lower in ABV than most typical spirits. So it's 24% alcohol content, so much lower than your typical spirits. It is sweet and bitter and kind of offers this really kind of complex, layered flavor profile to any drink that you may use it with. So the Bourbon Boulevardier is a really cool cocktail historically. Back during Prohibition, lots of bartenders were out of work. And back then, in the 20s and 30s, bartending was a very prestigious job. And it's becoming so today as well, I should have to say. But back then, you know, your bartenders were kind of political figures and very well-respected men, usually. So a lot of them were, you know, had no other career to follow when Prohibition hit. So a lot of them moved to Europe to bartend over there. In Europe, there was a very popular cocktail at the time called the Negroni. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's going to be the exact same thing as you see right here, Campari, sweet vermouth, but gin instead of bourbon. And one night when he was bartending, somebody asked him to make, I can't remember his name, and I think it was a mouthful that I would butcher anyways. They asked this American bartender to make an American drink. So he swapped out whiskey for gin and called it the Boulevardier. So that is the cocktail that we are going to make first. What I really like about this cocktail is that you don't need any homemade ingredients. You don't need to juice anything. You don't need to make a syrup, pick anything from the garden. As long as you have these 3 bottles, you can make this cocktail. So really nice when, you know, you just want something a little bit more elevated at home, but you don't want to run to the store to grab anything. These will all stay good. You do want to keep your sweet vermouth after it's been opened in the fridge, and it usually lasts about a month. But anything that passed the typical fridge test, smell it, taste it, should work just fine. So what we're going to do, typically this is equal parts when you're making a Negroni, which is with the gin base. With bourbon being a little bit sweeter than gin, I think we can go a little bit heavier on the bourbon and back off the other 2 ingredients a little bit. So I'm going to start with my Campari. And we're going to measure 3/4 of an ounce. What I use to measure is this tool called a cocktail jigger. And it has an ounce side and a 2-ounce side. On the ounce side, I have little increments that tell me 1/4 ounce increments. If you don't have anything like that at home, which a lot of you probably don't, it's very easy to just use Google, like we all love to do, and convert your ounces to tablespoons and kind of do it that way. So, but it is also a great starter tool if you're looking to kind of get into making cocktails at home, since a lot of us are going out a lot less these days. It's a fun hobby and very impressive when you have company over to whip up a good cocktail, and this is a great tool to start with. So I'm going to measure 3/4 of an ounce of Campari and put it right into my mixing glass. The next thing I'm going to grab is the sweet vermouth. And that is going to be the same amount as the Campari, 3/4 of an ounce. So I'm just going to measure that in here. And then I'm going to go for my bourbon. So I'm going to reach for Fusion. And I'm going to do twice as much. It's kind of a 2 to 1 to 1, if you will. So I'm going to use 1.5 ounces of bourbon. So I'm going to flip that cocktail jigger over, go into my big side, and there's a line in there that tells me when I've reached 1.5 ounces. And that's all of your spirits. It's pretty much everything other than the garnish, which I'll show you last. So we've got all of the spirits in this mixing glass. Should look somewhat like that color and that volume if you're following along with me. The next thing we're going to do is ice this up and stir it. Couple of really important things when you're stirring a cocktail. You always want more ice because the more ice you have, the slower it's going to dilute. And the reason we are stirring this cocktail, while you might think it's just to chill it, it's actually more important that we add a little bit of water. And with a cocktail that is this short in volume, a little too much water can really ruin this cocktail. So we want to control the rate of dilution as much as possible. The more ice you have, the slower it dilutes, the more control you have. So I've got my ice bucket right here, and I'm just going to fill this glass all the way up. Any kind of ice you have at home will do. Definitely don't use crushed ice if you have that option on your fridge, because the smaller the ice is, the quicker it dilutes. Once again, it's about control. You'd almost not need to dilute it at all if you poured it over crushed ice. Crushed ice will melt like that, right? So big ice is better, but you gotta make work what you got, right? So there's my ice in here. I'm gonna take this bar spoon. If you don't have a bar spoon, anything with a long handle, stick it in there, start stirring it up. And you'll notice as I stir this that the ice is going to slowly fall down and that wash line or the level of liquid is going to slowly rise up, letting me know that I've added a bit of water, that I've diluted this correctly. And my ice has been kind of sitting out at room temperature for a while, so it's actually going to happen pretty quickly for me. And you'll notice right away that that volume looks a little bit higher, looks a little bit larger, and the ice is falling down. So I'm good with this right here. I'm going to take my strainer to hold the ice back, but if you have a spatula, use your hand if you need to. You know, if you're drinking this for yourself, which I'm going to drink this for myself, you know, you just put your hand over it, hold that ice back. But for the sake of showing you all the fancy things, I'll use this strainer, and we're going to strain that into our rocks glass. And you can just set that mixing glass away. We're not going to use that again. The next thing you want to do is add some ice to your glass with your cocktail in it. If you have a really big piece of ice, like one of those ice molds that people get for bourbon drinks sometimes, that's great. The bigger the ice is, once again, the slower it's going to dilute, the longer you can enjoy it without getting it too watered down. I'm just using some regular ice. So that's full of ice, full of the cocktail. Now the last step is extremely important. It seems very trivial, but it actually makes a huge difference to the overall taste of this cocktail. And if you're following along with me, I want you to try something. So in order to kind of emphasize just how important the last step is, go ahead and try this cocktail as it is. Take a small sip and understand that this is not finished. Just kind of check on it and see how it's tasted. All right, you taste the bourbon, you taste some bitterness, you taste the spices from the vermouth. It's all tasting like a cocktail should, probably. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a peeler. So my peeler is horizontals, maybe different than a peeler that you have at home. Anything will work. But you're going to want to take an orange, make sure you wash it because they spray it with a bunch of stuff at the grocery store. Wash it, dry it, and take a peeler and peel off a slice of orange peel. Now, if you notice, the side that's bright orange, right, the side that you see on the fruit, it is covered in oil. And while you might think that nothing is going to happen, I'm going to bring this up very close to the camera so that you can see it. When you take the orange peel with the oily side, the orange side face down over the drink, so I'm going to do this over my drink, but I'm going to show you up close on my hand here. You're just going to gently squeeze it on the long sides with the oily face down, and you'll see just a mist of oil cascade over my hand. So I'll see if you guys can see this. Tons of oil right there, right? So even though you might not see it as you do it over your drink, you are going to be expressing a lot of orange oil that is really going to kind of take this cocktail from meh to fantastic. So I'll show you right here with my cocktail. I'm going to face down on the oily side, gentle squeeze. And then if you're feeling extra, you can kind of just kiss the rim with the peel, add a little bit more oranginess to it. And then I kind of take the opposite corners of the peel and turn them into each other to create kind of a spiral. Just kind of hold it like that for a second, drop it in there, and you have a beautiful garnish as well. So that is your Bourbon Boulevardier. If you're following along, take a sip now and see how much better it smells and tastes with that just smallest expression of orange oil on top. That is a fantastic cocktail. One of my favorite cocktails and one of my go-to cocktails. Absolutely. So if you go to any type of bar or restaurant that has a cocktail program. By that, I mean they're not just pouring whiskey and cokes and draft beer, right? Like somewhere with maybe like an actual cocktail menu. If you don't see a Boulevardier on the list, you could bet you anything still order one, and the bartender will be able to fix something up exactly like this. So super quick, super easy, 3 ingredients plus an orange peel, and you have a very delicious cocktail. So hopefully one that you guys enjoy and can share with your friends, make for yourself going into the weekend, and enjoy that with your bourbon of choice. I think I forgot to mention at the beginning, if you all want to ask any questions, feel free to use the chat. And when I'm done with both cocktails, we can maybe open it up to unmute and ask me some questions directly. So go ahead and enter your questions in through the chat there, and I'll address them after we get through these cocktails. That being said, I'm going to take my ingredients out of the way for the first cocktail and tell you guys about the second one. So the second one is maybe a little bit more approachable for those of you that maybe don't drink cocktails often or don't drink bourbon often. So this is what I would call a people pleaser. It's the bitter bourbon sour. So all the sour means is that you're going to be using fresh citrus. So I have some lemon juice pre-squeezed right here. I'm going to use an ounce of lemon juice in the cocktail. If you don't want to measure it, I feel like you can still make this cocktail pretty easily without measuring some of these ingredients. 1 lemon usually yields about 1 ounce. Obviously, you're going to get some, that are out of season or a little bit drier, things like that. But typically, you can trust that 1 lemon is good for 1 cocktail. We're also going to use some simple syrup. So something that a lot of people are intimidated about is making simple syrup. A lot of people are going to the store to buy simple syrup, and certainly you can place a high value on convenience, right? But if you only knew how easy it is to make simple syrup, I don't think you would ever buy it again. So what I do is always equal parts by volume. So 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of hot water, and you just stir that together until all those sugar crystals dissolve, and you've got a simple syrup. So nothing too fancy about it, quite a simple process, if you will, and much, much, much cheaper than buying anything that comes in a bottle. Literally could cost you pennies to make some simple syrup, and you can keep it in your fridge for up to, I'd say, 6 to 8 weeks if it's not infused with anything. And you can use that in so many cocktails, old fashions, bourbon sours, anything. A little sugar goes a long way in a lot of cocktails. So we've got our simple syrup. We've got our lemon juice, which makes it a sour. We've got our bourbon, which is our base spirit. And to kind of mix things up, I have a spirit called Averna. So this is in a category of spirits called Amaro or Amari. It's Italian. Amaro is the Italian word for bitter. So a little bit like Campari, but it's got this darker color and kind of richer flavor profile. But it's going to offer the same thing that the Campari did to the first cocktail, something bitter. In almost every part of the world outside of America, bitter flavors are really appreciated and sought after. Especially in Italy, not only with their amari, but with their coffee and dark chocolate, cappuccinos, and think of all of those things. They really appreciate a bitter flavor, and adding bitter to something that has citrus and sugar and booze and spirit really kind of rounds it out and makes it just very interesting, kind of really well-rounded, if you will. So those are the ingredients that we're working with: simple syrup, sugar, Amaro, and bourbon. Now, totally optional, but I highly recommend a traditional sour uses an egg white, and it's totally safe. It's not gross. If you've ever had a meringue pie, then it's going to be very similar, right? That meringue is made with egg whites, and the friction of whipping it, right, is what kind of takes anything bad out of it, makes this fluffy texture. It's going to be somewhat similar, not exactly the same with this cocktail. So this is going to be a cocktail that is shaken. You will need some shaker tins. Sometimes they look like this. Sometimes the little guy is just a beer pint glass, and that works just fine. All you need is just an enclosed space where you can shake it up. The metal is really nice for the egg whites, though. If you start using plastic, you're not going to get that chemical reaction that you need to get that fluffy texture from the egg white. So it has to be tin. We are going to start building the drink in one of your tins. I usually prefer my small tin because I can kind of see in it a little bit better. And if you're using the egg white, we're going to start with the egg white. Always start with the egg white because there are so many accidents that can happen. You can, get shell in there, or you can accidentally get the yolk in there, or even worse, you could break the yolk and get it in there, and you wouldn't want all of your bourbon and other stuff in there when you do that. So I always start with the egg white. Room temperature is best, but cold will work just fine. Couple of ways you can do the egg white. Honestly, I'm terrible at it. I'm not much of a cook, so I have a couple extra eggs here in case I mess up. But I'm just going to crack this egg open, and I kind of just like hold the egg in one half, the larger half, while some egg white drips out, and then I transfer it back over to the smaller half, and I get the rest of that white while the yolk kind of stays in the shell. And then when you're done with that, you can just toss it. I didn't think about where I would toss this. Here we go. Now our egg white is in there. That's from one whole egg. That usually does well for 1 or 2 cocktails. If you were doubling down, I think 1 whole egg worth of the egg white is good for 2 cocktails. So now that we've got that in there, or maybe you're just waiting to get started with the other ingredients, we're going to reach for our simple syrup next. And I'm going to measure 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup. So once again, you can use tablespoons, convert that on Google, should you need to. So we're going to do 3/4 of simple syrup into our shaker tin. Then I'm going to grab my lemon juice, and I'm going to do 1 whole ounce. 1 whole ounce or 1 whole lemon is a pretty good. And of course, after you kind of taste this, you can decide, hey, I like it a little more tart, add a little more lemon, or go the other direction and add a little bit less. But I think that 3/4 is going to give you just enough to have kind of some flavor, but not too much bite. The next thing we're going to grab is the Averna. So if you were able to pick this up and have it at home to mix with, this is really, really tasty, even on its own. In Italy, they drink this as an after-dinner drink, or digestif. It helps you kind of digest your meal. It is packed with tons of different herbs and tree barks, fruit peels, dried flowers, and all those things. So it kind of has this medicinal flavor and medicinal effect as a digestive. So we're just going to use a little bit of it, and I'm going to use a 1/2 ounce in the cocktail. It's going to give it a beautiful color as well. You guys will see when I have the product finished. So there is a 1/2 ounce of the Averna. And then we're going to add our bourbon. And I'm going to do 1.5 ounces, which is exactly what we used on the first cocktail for the bourbon as well. 1.5 ounces of bourbon right into your mixer tin with all of the other ingredients. Now, everything is in there. Should you be using an egg white, we're going to take 2 steps. If you're not using the egg white, you can skip this step and wait for the next step. But if you have an egg white in there, in order to get that kind of friction and react with the metal of the tin to get that fluffy texture, we need to do what is called a dry shake. So all that means is we're going to shake it, but with no ice. And it's very important that this be done kind of quickly or forcefully. You don't want to kind of just casually shake it up. You really want to get into it. So you can watch me do it. It's always pretty funny to see bartenders when they start shaking an egg white cocktail, because nobody looks not silly when they're doing this. So have fun watching this. So I'm going to shake it for about 10 to 12 seconds pretty intensely. And if you've made a meringue on a lemon meringue pie or made your own whipped cream by hand, you understand why you need to do that so quickly. Very important. Oh, yeah. So I think I'm going to call it right there. And I should have warned you. Hopefully we didn't have any spills at home. When you are shaking the egg white with the spirit in the tin like that, you're also creating these gases that will build up pressure inside this enclosed container, right? So you might notice that it starts kind of wanting to bust open or to break the seal. So just be careful of that. Once again, got to be kind of forceful with this to make it work. So now that we have done our dry shake, you might notice that inside it's going to look real foamy. If you're going without the egg white, it's still going to be a great cocktail. And you can join me on this step. So we're going to add some ice to the tin now and shake it up. And this time we're just trying to dilute it and chill it. So it doesn't need to be as forceful. It can be a little bit more cash. And you do want, a fairly good amount of ice, but not so much that it can't travel back and forth in the container, if that makes sense. So I'm going to pop the tins back together, shake it up for maybe 10 seconds. Now, sometimes these are hard to separate when you have ice and all those things in here. Smacking it on the side of the bottom tin, the bigger tin, keeping just one hand on the bottom so that this can move around a bit. Helps you break the seal and separate those. So then you're going to want to take a strainer of some kind. I have a million different strainers on me. This one is called a Hawthorne strainer. Made by the Hawthorne company. There's the only reason there. But anything that's going to help kind of keep the ice back is all you need. So we're going to strain this into something served up. So once again, obviously you're going to use what you got at home. But if you have something that has a stem like this is called a coupe glass. Maybe you have a martini glass. It's really going to give it a beautiful presentation. So I'm just going to strain that into here. Oh, it's a full cocktail. It is very full. And you'll notice, at least in my cocktail, that there's going to be just maybe 1/4 of an inch of kind of this white head that collects at the top. That is a result of the egg white, and it's going to give it just this really velvety texture. You're not going to taste eggs whatsoever, although you will be getting some protein. So this is the bitter bourbon sour. The reason I really like using the Amaro, not only because it tastes great, is because it gives you a really cool contrast of color from the foam on top and the drink that is underneath it. So that is your bitter bourbon sour. One last thing, I typically don't garnish this drink because I think it is so beautiful as it is in color and presentation, but some people really love a garnish. So one thing you can do is grab some cocktail bitters. Everybody probably seen these before, maybe never used them, but this is probably the oldest brand of bitters that you can find, and you can find it anywhere, called Angostura. It's got this white paper, ill-fitted wrapping and the bright yellow cap. It's very easy to find. And what you can do is just add a couple drops that will sit right there on top of the foam and kind of give it like a mod little geo design, if you will. So kind of 3 dots, looks real cool like that, but something nice and simple to not take away from how beautiful this drink is on its own. So cheers if you were following along with me. I hope you have something that turned out somewhat like this. If not, and you're wondering what you did wrong, go ahead and feel free to ask me some questions. I'm going to take a sip of this and make sure that I did it right. Yes, that is such a good cocktail. So that's it for me, guys. I know I went through that kind of quickly. So truly, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions about cocktails, about Bardstown Bourbon Company, maybe you've been trying things at home during, working from home, and they're not going so great, or maybe they're really great and you want to share. Let me know what you guys have for me, please. Anything at all. And if you're just sitting there enjoying your cocktails, that's good too. All right. Well, I don't see anybody speaking up and asking any questions. So feel free to follow Bardstown Bourbon Company on Instagram at Bardstown Bourbon Company. If you're into cocktails and wanting to learn more, you can also follow me. My Instagram handle is at There For You in Spirits, all one word. I post cocktails all the time, do tons of stuff on Instagram live, kind of showing you exactly how to make simple syrups and do cool things with cocktails. So yeah, thank you all for being here. Let me know how I can help you guys with your cocktail questions in the future. And with that, I'm not sure who I'm supposed to turn it over to close it out, but please speak up so people stop staring at me.
That would be us, me and
Okay.
Billy. Sam, thank you very much. That was awesome. And if people did miss some steps of that, again, this video is being recorded, and so it will be available after the fact. Wanted to say thanks everyone for joining. We will send some follow-up information tomorrow with if you have questions about other information. And Billy, did you want to say anything as well?
No, Sam, awesome job. That was really great. We were sitting here wishing that someone had provided us a cocktail kit in this room, but didn't make it up here somehow. So like David said, if you missed anything, catch it again on Facebook, and we really appreciate everybody spending their Thursday afternoon with us.